Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. As you know, the Ignition Time channel is about the country, the economy, as well as your money. Now, it's very clear, and we all know that the US government is in debt. The US government simply spends more money than it takes in. And with all the stimulus, the massive whopping $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, on top of the two stimulus bills in the year 2020, in addition to the upcoming Build Back Better agenda, which is projected to be at least $3 trillion, potentially higher because the Biden administration is facing pressure from conservatives. The question is, where is all of this money going to come from? It's been raining money. There's a lot of money that has been made available to businesses. There's been over $400 billion that has been spent with the $1,400 stimulus checks that have gone out, that are scheduled to go out to 85% of American households. They've actually gone out to almost half of those households at the time I'm recording this video. Where is this money going to come from? Is it going to come from increased taxes on the ultra wealthy? Could the Biden administration raise taxes from 21% all the way up to 28%? There was some talk about raising the corporate income tax rate to 25%. Or is there a way to make the IRS more efficient so that the US government can collect more money without raising taxes? Yes, you heard that right. Can the US government collect more money without raising taxes on individuals? That is the subject of this video. According to new reporting from Fox Business, and they quoted the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, the IRS could raise revenue without raising tax rates if it was properly resourced. Now, the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen did point out that the IRS has been combating both a decline in staffing as well as a decline in resources. The way the IRS works is that they have staff working for them, they have accountants, they have auditors, and their job is to look at numbers, look at accounts, identify what needs to be audited, make sure that individuals pay their fair share of taxes. But what happens when there is a reduction in staffing for the IRS, which in fact has been happening? And what happens when the IRS resources, the kind of technology they use, the kind of systems they use, is not properly upgraded over time? Remember, we live in the United States of America, the birthplace of Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, Tesla, and we have the IRS, which is responsible for collecting money, that is suffering a shortage of staff members and a shortage of resources. Now, let me ask you, if you talk to someone and you're like, which company do you want to work for? You'll likely hear Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Tesla. Have you ever talked to someone who says, I'd like to go work for the IRS? Yes, that was an impersonation of no one in particular, just an imaginary character that I just made up. But let's get back to the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. This is a comment from her. The tax gap is huge, and I think we would have a fairer tax system and collect more tax revenue without the need to raise rates if we resourced the IRS properly to be able to address the issue. And the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen did also observe that the tax gap, which is basically the difference between what the IRS is owed and what it will collect, is estimated to be $7.5 trillion over the next decade. What this means is the IRS, if they collected every dollar that was owed to them, the US government would have an extra $7.5 trillion over the next decade, which would pay for all the stimulus that we've done so far, and it would pay for the entire Biden infrastructure Build Back Better agenda, because that plan is expected to be $3 trillion. The American Rescue Plan was $1.9 trillion. And then when you add up the total of all the stimulus that was passed last year, approximately $2 trillion, a little bit more for the CARES Act, and $900 billion, you do actually have a grand total in the $8 trillion range, which is all the money that is owed to the IRS in the next 10 years that the IRS is not able to collect because the IRS does not have enough staff members and does not have the right systems and resources. In the words of the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, this is referred to as the tax gap, a $7.5 trillion deficit over the next 10 years. It's incredible when you think about this tax gap and what it can do for the future of the country. I want our viewers and subscribers to know the extent of the problem facing the IRS. There was a 19% decline in workers from 2013 to 2018, and it lost half of its revenue offices and about 1/3 of its overall workforce over the past decade. Basically, the IRS has been shrinking. not just from a labor perspective, not just from a workforce perspective, but their offices have been shrinking. They are essentially now less powerful than they were 6-7 years ago. Funding for the IRS as of fiscal year 2018 was $11.4 billion, down from $12.15 billion in 2010. So Congress is allocating less money to the IRS, which is dwindling as an agency, while going deeper and deeper into debt and not funding the agency that is responsible for funding and collecting money for the US government. Think about that for a second. It's almost like you keep spending money, but you take what is essentially the agency that is responsible for your source of income and you're like, you're not that important. In fact, here's an interesting article on this entire subject published by the Washington Post. You'll see the headline on your screen. For every extra dollar invested in the IRS, the government could be getting $6 back. Now, that is a pretty incredible rate of return for the US government. It makes sense to fund the IRS so that the country can collect the tax dollars in order to pay for the future. Here's something interesting. I was actually in a Zoom call yesterday, and there was a guy from South America who was planning to move to Florida. He was bragging about the fact that he had a $200,000 a year job. And I thought to myself, that's impressive. And he was figuring out, hey, how do I avoid paying taxes to the US government? Yeah, I was about to give him a piece of my mind, but then, something happened on the Zoom call and I had to step away. Folks, I believe that the IRS should be funded so that people can pay their fair share of taxes, so that we can rebuild our country, so that we can essentially set up new industries, new innovations, which we have the ability to do, thereby creating more jobs and helping people escape what you see on your screen, the cycle of poverty. I believe that we should pay our taxes. I believe it's the patriotic thing to do. I believe it's the American thing to do. And I believe that the fact that the IRS is severely underfunded and is being neglected by Congress is a tragedy in the making, and I hope that it gets corrected at some point or another. Here are some quotes from the Washington Post article. By inadequately funding the IRS, we are leaving money on the table. Thanks to years of budget cuts, the overall IRS budget is about 20% below its level a decade ago in inflation-adjusted terms. Meanwhile, the agency has been given more and more responsibilities. The distribution of all the stimulus money, by the way, was the responsibility of the IRS. And there are many, many other responsibilities. That's not the only thing. And very soon, providing monthly cash payments to families with children is going to be the child tax credit is going to be the responsibility of the IRS. The article also goes on to say, with fewer resources available to handle all these duties, something had to give. That turned out to be enforcement. Tax cheats can now get away with murder, or at least the ability to substantially shortchange Uncle Sam. The number of IRS revenue agents, these are the auditors qualified to examine complex returns, has fallen by 43% over the past decade, and audit rates for those filing complex returns have also sharply declined. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that the IRS needs more funding, and when the IRS gets more funding, the US government will be able to collect the taxes that are owed to them. In other words, every $1 of investment into the IRS will yield the government $6 in returns by way of tax revenue. The income of the US government comes from tax revenue. In fact, I've done a detailed video on how the US government gets money and how the US government spends money. So I encourage you to check out that video when you get a chance. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new. Please click the like button. Please subscribe. Please enable notifications. As always, you'll get a link to all of our resources in the description section below. Check it out and let me know what you think about this incredible scenario that the US government finds itself in. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. I appreciate you. Please click the like button. Please subscribe. Please enable notifications. That would mean a lot to me. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.